Welcome back, everyone. Today we're taking a look at the buffed Vermont. Yes, finally this fat American battleship line gets a buff. And before we start, well, the reason you want to go up this line is the sheer alpha damage. This ship is at its best dev striking cruisers. That is what this ship does, and it still does it extremely well as we almost take out that Riga in one shot. That was our first salvo. The very last salvo of this game actually was on the Midway, and that is a nearly full health tier 10 carrier. Flat broadside, but as we know, battleships aren't the most consistent at the best of times. And yet here, yeah, we absolutely crush him. Vermont is probably one of the more consistent battleships at dealing damage to broadside targets. The downside, of course, is that pesky reload, and previously, it's also been the hull. It's been extremely slow, easy to hit, takes a ton of damage, and really can't get away from bad situations. Yeah, yes, that Montana took nearly 70,000 damage. But it's situations like this, where you've used your damage control, you're on a double flood, triple fire, double fire, that kind of thing, and this ship just couldn't handle it. Here I overextend just a little too far, not knowing exactly which DDs are out here. Unfortunately, there was a Holland as well as the Kavaros there, so yeah, we're dying to dot damage very quickly. Unfortunately, the carrier's also here. It's situations like this where the old Vermont struggled, and the new one isn't going to do amazing there either, but it's going to do a lot better with the fast cooldown heal and, of course, the massive maneuverability upgrades. The heal also heals back Citadel damage a little better, as well as torpedo damage. And honestly, the biggest thing for me is that maneuverability. It feels really, really nice to play. And the most baffling part, though, is the concealment. Yeah, old Vermont was in that 14-kilometer range, pretty standard battleship. New one is 12.6, and we'll talk more about that later and why that's such a worrying trend, but, well, for now, a broadside incomparable that takes 6 overpens. Sure, he took 1 Citadel, but I really was thinking I was dev striking this guy. Incomparable has a pretty large, relatively easy to hit Citadel, especially broadside. This ship is not tanky. Unfortunately for us, he actually just shoots back and detonates us. So, you know, some days the game is telling you to go play something else, or maybe go outside and touch some grass, which I may have got up from my chair there. That's why my camera wasn't moving. So the new Vermont, though, that is the thing. The new heal, I was thinking, allowed me to play in some off flanks, play very aggressive, much like an Ohio would, right? Where I'm trying to get up and use islands to potentially get some good crossfires and actually tank my way through some of these difficult experiences, right? Using that fast cooldown heal. Although we're going to see that that didn't actually turn out so well. This ship, while more maneuverable and well able to deal with torpedoes a little better, yeah, you're still not surviving a point-blank Unicum. That's just not going to happen. Of course, I also tried in some capture zone areas, right? Two Brothers can be a really good map for crossfires. And this position here, while a little bit risky, is good at taking out enemies on the 1-2 lines. Unfortunately, though, I've overestimated the capabilities of this ship. I had to figure out what the limits are, of course, and for the Vermont, it seems like the limits are not getting caught bow in, and that really doesn't change. It shouldn't surprise anyone, but I did have to check a little bit how much this ship could actually tank, and that really influenced my build. Of course, giving flat broadside to a Vermont at these ranges is probably going to lead to death, so just straight up tanking isn't the best idea. The other thing that influenced my build is that Vermont needs to show a lot of broadside to get its full guns off. And here we're going to see the enemy Vermont take a massive salvo, even though he's reasonably well angled. You can't get your guns off at 30-degree angle. You have to give a little more, and that's just enough for a salvo like this to connect. You'll notice I'm aiming towards that front turret, and yeah, 40k damage or so right into his magazines. It's tough, but you see how quickly I was actually able to angle back in here. That's why I'm actually taking rudder shift mod, not propulsion mod. The buff itself, in my opinion, is more than enough to deal with the lackluster acceleration that we had before, and I'm taking this updated propulsion and pairing it with rudder shift mod to give me some pretty insane maneuverability. Of course, Annapolis early game figures out why you don't really want to go broadside to a Vermont. But again, this maneuverability is why I'm actually very much enjoying the Vermont again. I'm playing it as a mid-range battleship, and it's pretty difficult for enemy ships to get decent salvos in on me because I'm able to dodge a lot of them surprisingly well, actually. The other thing, of course, is the concealment here. You're going to notice I'm not spotted. I'm very close to this friendly Vampire 2 on our team. I'm very close to the cap, and I'm not getting spotted. Might be because there's not really a DD around here. We don't really know, but this concealment, I think, is just too good. This amount of firepower, having 12.6 kilometer detect, that's overpowered. I think the other buffs make a lot of sense. Some of the ones I'm not really sure about maybe are to do with the change in Citadel and torpedo healing. That seemed like a battleship characteristic that, yeah, if you eat Citadels or torpedoes, it's going to hurt your ability to tank. But this concealment one really worries me. We're getting a lot of overmatching battleships that have insane concealments. Incomparable is, of course, the poster child for this. But Vermont having 12 guns, not just 6 RNG focused guns, 12 guns that overmatch 30 millimeters. And here we're dealing damage to broadside Annapolis, right? So it's probably going to do damage anyway if we were Montana or something, but I think that this concealment paired with this firepower is just a little bit too much. Perhaps the reason they made this change is to do with the slower shell velocity. Old Vermont had really, really good shell velocity, and it maintained that shell velocity over a very long distance. New Vermont, though, it has the Ohio gun shell velocity, I believe now, which means at long range, it's very hard to hit targets since the shells are so floaty. Perhaps they were thinking that by giving it better concealment, it can play a little closer and it can deal with that slower shell velocity just a little bit better, but maybe just give it its old shell velocity back and put its old concealment back. I think that that would be a little bit more fair. I'm always tending to talk about counterplay and what's fair in a lot of these buff and nerf discussions. I really don't think it's fair for a Hindenburg and a Vermont to spot each other at the same time. And, well, Vermont overmatches Hindenburg everywhere. That's really not going to go particularly well. This also impacts other things like destroyer fights, where I'm able to push up much closer and impact some of those DD fights as well. Light cruisers trying to get in position at islands, that kind of thing as well. It's tough to deal with a Vermont that just pops up at 12 kilometers. A little bit of heads up might have helped that Jidan survive a little bit longer. So I really do think Vermont is an excellent battleship. It's been a decent, if niche battleship that really focused on long-range, devastating salvos into broadsides. Now it's a little better at a jack-of-all-trades kind of role here. As we can see, we're pretty easily dodging these Des Moines salvos and even able to turn back in once this Kremlin's going to shoot us and dodge a few of those salvos as well. This new Vermont is quite agile, and because of that, it's much more tanky and able to play at closer ranges. The new concealment, of course, also makes it way easier to play at close ranges. There's a destroyer spotting us here somewhere, but I'm really not too worried since my Shimakaze is out scouting, and I know my maneuverability is going to help me deal with torpedoes if they come. So on top of the healing back more torpedo damage, this maneuverability gives us the ability to just dodge way more torpedo salvos in the first place. This ship is much tankier than it used to be. It can play much more aggressive, even without the buff in concealment, in my opinion. I think the concealment buff is just going a step or two too far. I think Vermont would have been great without that concealment buff while retaining all of the other ones. For me, the biggest two are the maneuverability and this fast cooldown heal. And this here really illustrates why I don't want this improved concealment on a Vermont. The Shimakaze that was spotting us dies. And now there's a Des Moines at 13 kilometers trying to farm us. And yet we go dark. And now he doesn't know when we're going to fire. He doesn't know what's going to come his way. We get this nice ability to line up a salvo on him. The Shimakaze that was in the cap is now spotting us, but I think that that's just a little bit too unfair for cruiser players that, well, they don't even have armor to bounce these shells. So Yeah, pretty devastating to deal with as a cruiser player. It's going to lead to even more passive results, I think. A Vermont that's this stealthy, if you see it in a game, you know you have to play careful until you know exactly where it is and exactly what it's shooting at. I don't know. I think it's just a little too far on the concealment. But enough of that. Let's talk about the extra healing we're getting on the Vermont now. These fast cooldown heals are so amazing. I have so much confidence to push in, even while I'm taking damage. You'll notice we had just finished using one of our heals, and the next one's going to be available in less than 30 seconds. That is why Ohio is one of the best brawling mid-range battleships in the game. Yes, it's got decent guns, yes, it's got good armor, yes, it's got some secondaries, but it's that heal that really carries it through situations where a lot of other battleships would end up dying before they get to that next heal. This fast cooldown on the heal, I would love to see on every battleship, honestly. I think that it would lead to a lot more aggressive battleship captains who feel like they can push in and not have to worry about timing that healing quite as much. The DPM in this game is constantly increasing as time goes on. It's getting more accurate and longer range, and I think that having these faster cooldown heals would lead to a lot more aggressive battleship captains. I know for me personally, I would be way more aggressive because all the damage that I take getting to one of these closer islands or even sustained damage in a DPM fight with a destroyer or a cruiser, I'd be able to heal back a lot more of that damage quicker than the actual ship would be able to kill me. Some of the time, I run away from flanks simply because there is a light cruiser or a destroyer on that flank, and I know that I won't be able to take them out before they burn me to the ground. An extra healing that I get from these faster cooldown heals would mitigate some of that and maybe open up some more aggressive opportunities. But let me know what you think of that idea in the comments down below. It might be a little too strong on some ships like Kremlin, but maybe for some of the other ships like German battleships, that'd be pretty sweet to have a GK or a Preußen that actually is able to heal through all that insane amounts of damage it's taking to its superstructure, for example. I don't know. I think that'd be kind of interesting. Might be a little too far, but I know I would certainly enjoy my brawling battleships a little more with that extra healing. Now onto this game. We're at 4 kills already, and we've played reasonably aggressive. Not overdoing it like some of those earlier examples I gave. And this carrier could be our Kraken. That would be very nice to get. But Vermont isn't always going to be consistent against broadsides. We saw that a little earlier that, well, that incomparable didn't take too much damage. And honestly, it might be a little bit unrealistic to expect to dev strike anything that goes broadside all the time. So if you're wondering if you should finally grind out this American battleship line, I think you should. I think that these buffs, especially on the Vermont, I'm not sure about the lower tier ones, the Vermont is well worth getting now. It is much more comfortable to play, and I think it fits much better into the meta of the game. I think the Concealment, though, is a little bit too strong, so if they nerf that back, I think it'd be a great ship in the meta currently. Montana is probably still the better ship overall, but Vermont fits a little better niche now, and I think it's a fun ship to play. With this commander build that I'm running, you'll notice that I have gun feeder. Sometimes it is nice to swap to those HE shells if someone's angled or if you run into a destroyer that you really have to try and dev strike, hoping that those HE shells connect and actually do full damage. I haven't talked about it yet, but Brisk is such a great skill on this new Vermont. If the concealment remains the same, which I don't know if it will. I hope it doesn't, but it might. It's just insane. With a 40-second reload, this means that 20 seconds, assuming that we're shooting on cooldown every single time, we're getting value out of Brisk half the time. In fact, it'd probably be over half the time, considering that the early game, getting into position is so important. Brisk is great on the Vermont. Aside from that, it really is just a standard tank build though, so nothing special here. Onto the upgrades though, I think that the common choice will be to run propulsion mod. And that's going to give you some insane acceleration. But for me personally, like I said, I really love the improved propulsion we get already with this buff. Having a 15.3 second rudder shift means that this ship is actually kind of hard to hit now. And I find myself dodging a lot of salvos. I'm pairing this with main battery mod 2 since we're tending to play a little closer, and that tends to mean that we need to turn our turrets from one side to the other a little bit more. I think that range mod is going to be just a little bit too hard to use as well. These shells are so floaty that 24.5 kilometers of range, it's more than enough. We're starting to see 15-second flight times out to that. It's hard to aim at that far. Of course, still running Artillery Plotting Room 2. I think that main battery mod 3 could be fun if you're looking to really brawl it out and maybe even go for the, what is this, close quarters combat? Might be interesting. I don't know. I think that this build is just a little bit better. Focusing on damaging salvos every 40 seconds is going to be a little better than not so accurate salvos every 36, 37 seconds. I want the accuracy. That's why I'm playing this ship. It's those devastating salvos. And the main guns really don't get knocked out much, so I'm trying to keep my AA alive and make use of this defensive fire consumable. It doesn't really shoot down much planes, but it makes me feel a little better while I'm getting struck. That's the new Vermont. I think it's really, really strong. A little bit too much on the concealment, but let me know what you think of this in the comments down below. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.